Lyra's hands shook as she watched the 12 warships settle into orbit above Gentle Haven. She had worked as a communications officer for 3 years, and the most exciting thing that ever happened was routing trade requests between merchant vessels. Now she stared at her screens and tried not to panic. The ships looked wrong. They were covered in jagged metal plates welded together like someone had built them from scrap and rage. Weapons bristled from every surface. These were not traders. These were not explorers. Everyone in the colony knew what they were. Pirates. Elder Finn entered the communications center, his soft blue fur rippling with obvious fear. The Pasari people were gentle by nature, herbivores who had never developed weapons or warfare on their homeworld. They traded, they negotiated, they built communities. Violence was something they read about in historical texts from other species. "Have they made contact?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded and played the recording. A harsh, grating voice filled the room, speaking in broken galactic common. "Gentle Haven, you have 24 hours. Surrender all valuable goods, technology, and 10,000 of your people for labor. Refuse, and we will take what we want from the ashes." Finn's legs buckled and he grabbed the edge of a console. 10,000 people? "We cannot. There must be some mistake. We are a peaceful colony. We have nothing of military value." "They don't care," Lyra said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "They're ravagers. They take what they want." The elder looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "What do we do?" Before Lyra could answer, the entire colony shook. Alarms screamed across every channel. Lyra pulled up the emergency feeds and felt her blood turn cold. The northern residential sector was gone. Just gone. Where 15,000 people had lived and worked, there was now a crater still glowing with heat. The harsh voice returned. "That was your warning. You now have 12 hours. Comply or we continue." Finn collapsed into a chair, his entire body trembling. Around the communications center, other Pasari workers wept openly. They had no weapons, no defense fleet, no soldiers. The colony security force carried stun batons for breaking up the occasional drunken argument between traders. Lyra felt something cold and sharp form in her chest. She pulled up her secondary console and began typing. Her grandfather had been a communications officer too, back before the Pasari had joined the Galactic Union. He had told her stories about the old emergency protocols, the ones from when space was more dangerous and less civilized. "What are you doing?" Finn asked. "Sending a distress signal," Lyra said. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, entering codes she had memorized as a child but never thought she would use. "There are old emergency frequencies." "Really old? From before the Union standardized everything. Who would be listening to frequencies that old?" Lyra didn't answer because she didn't know. The honest truth was that nobody probably listened to these channels anymore. But her grandfather had made her promise to remember them. "Just in case," he had said. "You never know when you might need to call for real help." She finished the message and hit transmit. It was simple, direct, and desperate. "Colony under attack. 50,000 civilians. No defenses. Please help. Coordinates attached." The message shot out into the void, riding on wavelengths that predated the modern Galactic Union by centuries. It would travel far, much farther than standard channels, but it would also take time. Time they didn't have. "We should begin evacuation procedures," Finn said, standing on shaky legs. "Perhaps we can hide some of our people in the mining tunnels." Lyra nodded, but her attention was fixed on her console. The Ravager ships were moving, repositioning themselves around the colony. They were surrounding Gentle Haven like predators circling wounded prey. In a few hours, they would start landing troops. After that, everything would happen very fast and very badly. She pulled up the colony roster. 50,000 names. 50,000 Pasari who had come to this moon to build something beautiful and peaceful. Farmers, teachers, merchants, artists, families. None of them had ever held a weapon. None of them would know how to fight even if weapons magically appeared. Hours passed in terrible silence. Finn coordinated the evacuation while Lyra monitored the Ravager fleet. They weren't doing anything yet, just waiting, letting the fear build. Psychological warfare against a species that had no psychology for war. Then, 8 hours after she had sent her desperate message into the void, her console chimed. Lyra almost ignored it, assuming it was another system alert. But something made her look. Incoming message. Source unknown. Frequency match emergency protocol 7. Her hands shook as she opened it. The message was short, just 7 words in clean galactic common. Message received. Hold on, we're coming. Lyra read it 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Someone had answered. Someone was coming. Elder Finn, she called out, her voice cracking. Someone responded to the distress call. Finn rushed over, read the message, and his expression shifted from hope to confusion. But who? There are no Union fleets in this sector. The nearest military garrison is weeks away. Lyra checked the transmission data. The message had originated from somewhere far outside Union space, from a region marked on old star charts but listed as unconfirmed in modern databases. She pulled up what little information existed about that region. One word appeared on her screen, one word that made her grandfather's stories come flooding back. Earth. No, Finn whispered, reading over her shoulder. That's just a legend. A myth to scare aggressive species. Humans aren't real. But Lyra remembered her grandfather's words spoken late at night when she was small. If you're ever in real trouble, little one, call for the humans. They're out there. And they answer. She looked at the countdown timer. 4 hours until the Ravagers began their assault. 4 hours for a myth to become real. Admiral Grace Hunt studied the holographic display floating above the conference table and felt her jaw tighten. The distress signal had come through on a frequency so old that most of the communication officers on duty hadn't even recognized it. Only the automated systems had caught it, systems maintained out of tradition rather than necessity. 50,000 civilians. 12 hours now down to 8. No defenses. It's outside our jurisdiction, said Counselor Marsh through the video link from Earth. His face showed the carefully practiced neutrality of a career politician. The Union has protocols for this. We should forward the message to the appropriate authorities. Grace had expected this. She kept her voice level. By the time the Union mobilizes a response, those people will be dead or enslaved. The nearest Union fleet is 19 days away. That's unfortunate, but Earth cannot police the entire galaxy. We're not policing. We're responding to a distress call. Marsh sighed. Admiral, I understand your frustration, but we have limited resources. We need Council approval for military action, especially this far from home. It could take days to get a vote. Grace looked at the hologram again. Gentlehaven. Population. Pasari, a species known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature. She had met a few Pasari traders over the years. They were kind, almost childlike in their trust of others. Easy targets. How long have we had the Guardian Protocol? She asked quietly. Marsh's expression shifted. Admiral, that protocol is for extreme circumstances. Define extreme. Because I'm looking at 50,000 civilians who are about to be slaughtered or enslaved by pirates. That seems pretty extreme to me. The Guardian Protocol had been written 60 years ago, after humanity had made first contact and learned just how dangerous the galaxy could be. It gave fleet commanders the authority to respond to immediate threats against civilian populations, without waiting for political approval. It had been used 3 times in 6 decades. If you invoke that protocol, you'll face an inquiry, Marsh warned. I'll face it gladly. Log my decision. I'm invoking Guardian Protocol Article 2, Section 4. 3rd Expeditionary Fleet is moving to assist Gentlehaven immediately. She cut the transmission before Marsh could argue further. Around the conference table, her senior officers watched her with expressions ranging from concern to grim approval. Captain Owen Rivers spoke first. They'll crucify you for this if it goes wrong. Then it better not go wrong. Grace pulled up a star chart. How fast can we get there? Lieutenant Nina Cross, her tactical officer, ran the numbers. Standard jump sequence puts us there in 40 hours. But if we use slipstream shortcuts through the Kepler rifts, we can make it in 36. The rifts haven't been fully charted, Owen said. It's dangerous. Nina's eyes were hard. So is letting 50,000 people die. Grace noticed the lieutenant's hands were clenched. Nina had lost her birth colony to pirates when she was 6 years old. The Union had arrived 4 days too late. Nina never talked about those 4 days. The rifts it is, Grace decided. Owen, I want 4 dreadnoughts, 12 destroyers, and the carrier group from Delta Station. Nina, send the word. We move in 30 minutes. The officers scattered to their duties. Grace returned to her ready room and pulled up everything humanity knew about the Ravagers. It wasn't much. They were a coalition of various species, outcasts and criminals who preyed on weak targets. They had numbers and brutality on their side. What they didn't have was experience fighting. Humans. Most of the galaxy still thought humanity was either A myth or a minor species that had gotten lucky with some advanced technology. The truth was more complicated. Earth was classified as a Class 12 deathworld, one of the most hostile planets in known space. Humanity had evolved as persistence hunters, apex predators who had clawed their way to the top of a brutal food chain. The galaxy was about to get a reminder of what that meant. 30 minutes later, Grace stood in the command center of the dreadnought Retribution. Around her, displays showed the fleet forming up. 4 massive dreadnoughts, each bristling with railguns and missile batteries. 12 destroyers, fast and deadly. The carrier Valkyrie holding 300 fighter craft. All ships report ready, Owen said from his command station. Then let's go get them, Grace said. Helm, take us into the rifts, maximum speed. The fleet jumped and reality twisted. The rifts were areas of space where gravity and physics got strange, where normal navigation became dangerous. But they also allowed for faster-than-light travel that was quicker than conventional jump drives. If you were willing to risk it, the human fleet was willing to risk it. Grace used the travel time to study the enemy. The Ravager fleet had 17 ships in total, according to the initial report. They had sent 12 to intimidate Gentlehaven, which meant they felt confident. They outnumbered her fleet. Numbers weren't everything. Admiral, Nina called out. We're picking up chatter on Ravager frequencies. They're bragging about the attack, sharing footage. Let me hear it. The bridge speakers crackled to life with harsh, laughing voices speaking in various languages. The translator rendered it into English. They were joking about how easy the Pasari would be to break. They were discussing which ones to take as slaves. They were making bets on how long it would take. Grace felt something cold settle in her chest. It wasn't anger exactly. Anger was hot and reactive. This was colder, sharper, more focused. This was purpose. Time to arrival? She asked. 34 hours, the helmsman reported. We're making good time through the rifts, 34 hours. Still 2 hours before the Ravager's deadline expired. They would make it. Barely. Grace pulled up the tactical display and began planning. The Ravagers would be in orbit, likely with their shields down to save power. They wouldn't expect a threat. They would be focused on the colony below. They would learn better. All ships, she broadcast to the fleet. I want weapons hot the moment we drop out of slipstream. Target locks immediately. We don't negotiate. We don't warn them. We don't give them time to threaten the colonists. She paused, looking at the faces of her bridge crew. They were young, most of them. They had trained for war but never really seen it. That was about to change. The galaxy thinks we're just another species. Just another group trying to survive out here. Let's remind them why Earth is called a death world. Let's show them what happens when you threaten the innocent. Owen stood at his station, his expression grim but determined. Orders, Admiral. Grace looked at the hologram of Gentlehaven, at the pirate ships surrounding it like vultures. We're going to kill every single one of those ships. No survivors leave this system. The Ravagers wanted to send a message with their brutality. We're going to send one right back. The fleet hurtled through the rifts toward Gentlehaven, toward 50,000 terrified civilians, toward a pirate force that had no idea what was coming for them. Humanity was coming, and humanity remembered how to hunt. Warlord Drake watched the sensor display with satisfaction as his ships tightened their formation around the helpless moon. In 2 hours, his troops would land and the real fun would begin. The Pasari would cry and beg, and he would take everything of value before selling the survivors to the slave markets in the Outer Rim. Warlord, his sensor officer called out. I'm detecting unusual readings at the edge of the system. Drake barely glanced up. Specify. Multiple contacts dropping out of slipstream. Configuration unknown. They're not broadcasting Union identification. That got Drake's attention. He pulled up the tactical display and studied the new arrivals. 20 ships arranged in a combat formation. Not massive by Ravager standards, but not insignificant either. Hail them, Drake ordered. No response came. The unknown ships continued their approach, accelerating toward the inner system. Their speed was impressive, Drake admitted, but he still had numerical superiority in position. Unknown vessels, this is Warlord Drake of the Ravager Confederation. You are entering a claimed system. State your business or be destroyed. Still no response. The unknown ship simply kept coming. Drake felt a flicker of irritation. Power up weapons. Move 3 ships to intercept. Let's see what these fools want. His fleet moved with practiced efficiency. 3 Ravager cruisers broke formation and accelerated toward the approaching vessels. Drake expected the unknowns to slow down, to respond, to show some sign of caution. Instead, they accelerated harder. "Warlord, the lead ships are human design," the sensor officer said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Human?" Drake laughed. "Those are just stories. Deathworld mythology to make herbivores behave." But something in his officer's tone made him look closer at the sensor data. The ship configurations were strange. Heavy armor plating, redundant systems, weapons that looked oversized for the hull dimensions, and they were still accelerating, now moving faster than should be safe. "Sir, the human ships are achieving weapons lock. Let them. Their toys won't penetrate our shields." But Drake moved closer to the display anyway. The human ships opened fire at extreme range. Railgun rounds, moving at a significant fraction of light speed, crossed the distance in seconds. Drake expected to see them splash harmlessly against his cruiser's shields. The first cruiser exploded, not damaged, not disabled. Exploded. The railgun rounds punched through the shields like they weren't even there, tore through the armor, and detonated the reactor. The cruiser became an expanding sphere of debris and atmosphere. The second cruiser managed to raise its shields to maximum. The human railguns fired again. The shields held for exactly 2 seconds before collapsing. More rounds slammed into the hull and the cruiser came apart in sections, venting crew and fuel into space. The third cruiser tried to turn and run. Missiles launched from the human destroyers, tiny things that moved with frightening speed and agility. Point defense systems shot down dozens, but hundreds more got through. The cruiser disappeared in a cascade of nuclear fire. 15 seconds. 3 ships gone. Drake's command center fell silent except for the warning alarms. Every officer stared at their screens in disbelief. "They're real," someone whispered. "The humans are real." Drake's mind raced. He had 17 ships total. He had just lost 3. The humans had 20. But he still had position, he still had the colony to use as leverage. All ships, combat formation, move to put the colony between us and the humans. If they want to play hero, they'll have to risk their precious civilians. His fleet began to move, but the human ships were already adjusting their trajectory. They were fast, terrifyingly fast, and they moved with a coordination that spoke of extensive combat experience. Fighter craft launched from one of the human carriers. Hundreds of them swarming forward like insects. But these insects were armed with missiles and plasma cannons. "Launch fighters," Drake ordered. "Meet them in open space." The Ravager fighters scrambled to launch. They outnumbered the human fighters 2-1. That should have been enough. The first engagement lasted less than a minute. Human fighters moved like nothing Drake had ever seen. They pulled maneuvers that should have killed their pilots, acceleration that should have turned them into paste. But they kept flying, kept shooting, kept killing. For every human fighter that went down, 5 Ravagers exploded. Commander Lin Shaw led her squadron through the chaos and felt the familiar rush of combat. The Ravagers flew like amateurs, with predictable patterns and poor formation discipline. Her heads-up display lit up with target locks and she squeezed the trigger on her control stick. Missiles streaked away. 3 Ravager fighters vanished in balls of fire. Lin pulled her fighter through a turn that would have been impossible in atmosphere. Her body pressed into the seat by forces that would cripple a normal human. But her flight suit managed the pressure, and her augmented reflexes kept her conscious. Gold Squadron, break left and engage the cruiser escorts. Silver Squadron, with me. We're going after their command ship. The human fighters split smoothly, each pilot knowing exactly what to do. They had trained for this. Humanity had learned long ago that space combat required speed, precision, and absolute ruthlessness. Back on the Retribution, Admiral Hunt watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. The Ravagers were trying to regroup, trying to use the colony as a shield. It wouldn't work. Nina, plot firing solutions on all enemy vessels. Avoid trajectories that could endanger the colony. Already done, Admiral. We can eliminate 6 more ships without risk to the surface. Then do it. Owen, move us forward. I want the Ravagers to see us coming. The 4 human dreadnoughts accelerated into the battle. They were massive ships, each one massing more than 3 Ravager cruisers. Their armor was designed to withstand impacts from asteroids and micrometeors at high velocity. Their weapons were designed to crack planets. The Ravagers opened fire desperately. Energy beams and missiles filled the space between the fleets. Most missed entirely. The few that hit splashed against the dreadnought armor and did nothing. The human response was devastating. Railgun rounds tore through 2 more Ravager ships. Missile salvos overwhelmed the point defenses of 3 others. Particle beams designed to slice through asteroids during mining operations carved a destroyer into pieces. Drake watched his fleet die and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Fear. Pure, primal fear. Pull back, he ordered. All ships retreat to the edge of the system. We'll jump out and regroup. Sir, the humans are pursuing. They're not letting us disengage. Of course they weren't. Drake realized with horrible clarity that the humans weren't here to drive them off. They were here to kill every single one of them. Broadcast to the humans, Drake said, his voice shaking. Tell them we surrender. Tell them we'll leave peacefully. The communication officer looked up with wide eyes. Sir, they're not accepting hails. They're jamming all frequencies except one. What frequency? The emergency channel. And there's a message repeating. It says no mercy, no quarter. Private David Oyo sat in the troop compartment of the assault shuttle and checked his rifle for the 3rd time. Around him, 24 other Marines did the same. They were preparing to board one of the Ravager ships, the big one that was probably the command vessel. 2 minutes. The pilot called back. They're firing at us, but it's scattered. I don't think they expected boarding parties. David smiled grimly. Nobody expected boarding parties anymore. Modern warfare was supposed to be clean, fought at long range with ships and missiles. But humanity remembered older lessons. Sometimes you needed boots on the deck. The shuttle shook as point defense fire clipped one of the wings. David barely noticed. He had been through worse during the asteroid pirate operations last year. 30 seconds. Brace for impact. The shuttle slammed into the Ravager command ship's hull and magnetic clamps locked them in place. Cutting torches burned through the armor. And then the boarding ramp dropped. David was the first one through, his rifle up and ready. The corridor beyond was full of smoke and confused Ravagers. They wore improvised armor and carried weapons that looked like they had been assembled from spare parts. They didn't stand a chance. The Marines moved through the ship like a precision instrument. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they cleared everything. Ravagers who surrendered were restrained. Ravagers who fought died quickly. On the bridge of his crippled flagship, Drake listened to the reports of boarders moving through his ship and knew it was over. The humans had torn his fleet apart in less than an hour. Now they were coming for him personally. The bridge doors exploded inward and armored figures poured through. Sergeant Beth Stone moved through the smoke-filled corridor with her rifle raised. Behind her, 3 other Marines maintained a tight formation. They had been fighting through the Ravager command ship for 20 minutes and resistance was crumbling fast. Contact front, said Private Harris over the squad channel. Beth saw them too. 6 Ravagers in makeshift combat gear, setting up behind an overturned cargo container. She made a quick hand signal and her team spread out. The Ravagers opened fire first, energy bolts that scattered wildly across the corridor. The Marines returned fire with controlled bursts. 3 of the Ravagers dropped immediately. The others threw down their weapons and raised their hands, chittering in panic. Secure them, Beth ordered, moving past without slowing. The bridge was close now. Command had been specific. Capture the warlord alive if possible, dead if necessary. But the pirate leadership was going to answer for what they had done. They reached the bridge entrance to find it barricaded. Beth signaled her demolitions expert forward. He placed shaped charges on the door hinges and everyone stepped back. The explosion was sharp and focused. The bridge doors fell inward with a crash of metal. Beth went through first, her rifle scanning for targets. Warlord Drake stood in the center of the bridge, surrounded by 6 guards in heavy armor. They had proper military gear, not the improvised junk most of the Ravagers wore. These were his elite, the ones he trusted most. Humans, Drake said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the destruction around him. So the stories are true. Drop your weapons, Beth ordered. All of you, now. The guards raised their rifles instead. Beth's team opened fire instantly. The fight was brief and brutal. 2 Marines took hits, but their armor held. All 6 guards went down in seconds. Drake grabbed for a weapon on his command chair. Beth shot him in the shoulder, the round punching through his light armor and spinning him around. He collapsed to the deck, bleeding and gasping. Medical, Beth called over the radio. 1 prisoner injured but stable. She walked over to Drake and kicked his weapon away. The warlord looked up at her with pain and confusion in his eyes. Why? He managed to ask. Those colonists are nothing to you. Why come all this way? Beth thought about her answer for a moment. She thought about the reports from Gentle Haven, about 15,000 civilians killed as a warning. She thought about the 50,000 more who had huddled in shelters, waiting to die or worse. Because someone had to, she said simply. Down on Gentle Haven's surface, Lyra stood at the communications center window and watched the battle end. The space above the colony had been full of fire and destruction for nearly an hour. Now it was quiet except for the human ships maintaining orbit. Elder Finn stood beside her, his legs still shaky. They actually came. They're real. They're real, Lyra confirmed, though she still could hardly believe it herself. A new message appeared on her console. Human military requesting permission to land a shuttle at the colony's main spaceport. Elder Finn authorized it immediately. They walked to the spaceport together, joined by dozens of other colonists. Everyone wanted to see the humans, the legendary Deathworlders who had just saved their lives. Fear and gratitude mixed together in equal measure. The shuttle landed with practiced precision. It was a sleek military design, scarred from combat but still functional. The boarding ramp lowered and a figure emerged. Admiral Grace Hunt removed her helmet as she walked down the ramp. Behind her, a squad of Marines maintained a respectful distance. She had deliberately chosen to come down with minimal escort, not wanting to frighten the colonists more than necessary. The Pasari stared at her in silence. Grace understood. Humans looked scary to most species, predator eyes forward-facing, too many teeth designed for tearing meat, tall and heavily built compared to the gentle Pasari. Elder Finn stepped forward, though Grace could see he was terrified. Admiral Hunt, I am Elder Finn. On behalf of Gentle Haven, His voice broke. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Grace kept her posture relaxed and non-threatening. We received your distress call. We came as fast as we could. You were so far away. You had no obligation to help us. That's not how we see it, Grace said. She looked around at the gathered colonists, at their soft features and frightened eyes. You needed help. We could provide it. That's all the obligation we needed. Finn's eyes filled with tears. The Ravagers killed 15,000 of us. Just as a warning. We had no defense, no way to fight back. Grace felt anger tighten in her chest again, but kept her voice gentle. I know, we saw the recordings they broadcast. That's why we didn't give them a chance to do it again. Are they all dead? Most of them. We captured their leadership. They'll stand trial. A young Pasari stepped forward hesitantly. Grace recognized her from the file she had reviewed during the trip. Lyra, the communications officer who had sent the distress call. You came because of me, Lyra said quietly. Because of the old emergency frequencies, Grace smiled. You did exactly the right thing. You saved your colony. I didn't save anyone. You did. We saved each other, Grace corrected. You were brave enough to call. We were close enough to answer. That's how it's supposed to work. Behind Grace, her medical teams were already setting up emergency treatment centers. The Ravagers had caused significant damage before the human fleet arrived. There were injured colonists who needed help, infrastructure that needed repair. Your people are welcome to stay as long as necessary, Finn said. We have little to offer in payment, but whatever we have is yours. We don't need payment. This is what we do. Finn looked confused. I don't understand. In the galaxy, everything has a price. Military aid especially. Grace chose her words carefully. Humanity learned some hard lessons when we first left our homeworld. We learned that the galaxy can be cruel. We learned that peaceful species like yours need protection. We decided that if we had the strength to help, we had the obligation to use it. That's not how most species think. Maybe not, but it's how we think. Medical teams were already working on injured colonists. Engineers were assessing damaged structures. It was organized chaos, but it was helping. Grace watched her people work and felt proud of them. Admiral, said one of her aides, approaching quietly, we've completed the sweep of the system. All Ravager vessels accounted for. 12 destroyed, 5 captured. No survivors in the destroyed ships. Casualties? 8 wounded, none critical. We lost 6 fighters, but all pilots recovered. Grace nodded. Light casualties, considering they had just wiped out a pirate fleet. Training and technology had made the difference. Lyra was still watching her, those large eyes full of questions. Can I ask you something, Admiral? Of course. The galaxy tells stories about humans, about Earth being a death world, about humanity being dangerous. Are those stories true? Grace considered the question. Around them, her Marines stood in formation, weapons ready but not threatening. They were professionals, trained and disciplined. But they were also predators evolved from a world that had tried to kill them at every turn. Yes, Grace said honestly, the stories are true. Earth is one of the most dangerous planets in known space. We evolved in an environment that demanded strength, adaptability, and cooperation just to survive. We are predators. We are dangerous. Fear flickered across Lyra's face. But, Grace continued, being dangerous doesn't mean being cruel. We chose to use our strength to protect others, not prey on them. That's the difference between us and the Ravagers. The Ravagers called themselves strong too. Strength without honor is just brutality. The Ravagers learned that lesson today. Elder Finn had composed himself somewhat, though his voice still shook. What happens now? Now we make sure your colony is secure, Grace said. We'll help with repairs. We'll leave a patrol ship in the system for a few months, just to make sure no other pirates get ideas. And we'll let the galaxy know what happened here. Let them know? Grace smiled, and this time there was something cold in it. Let them know what happens when you attack peaceful civilians. Let them know that humanity is watching. Let them know that if you call for help, we answer. She turned to look at the orbital space where the Ravager fleet had been, where debris now drifted and human ships patrolled. The age of easy prey is over, Grace said quietly. Pirates, slavers, anyone who thinks they can prey on the weak just because they're weak. They all need to learn a new lesson. The galaxy has guardians now. Lyra looked at the human admiral and realized something important. The stories about humanity being dangerous were true. But the stories had missed something vital. Humans weren't just dangerous. They were dangerous in the service of something good. Thank you, Lyra said again, meaning it with everything she had. Thank you for answering. Grace put a hand on the young Pasari's shoulder, gentle despite the strength behind it. Always, she said. You call, we answer. That's the promise. Ambassador Peter Walsh sat in the reception room of the Concordat Central Complex and tried not to think about how strange the past 3 weeks had been. The footage from Gentle Haven had spread across the galaxy faster than he had thought possible. Now every government, every species, every news network wanted to talk to humanity. Most of them were terrified. The door opened, and High Chancellor Mira entered. She was a tall, elegant being from a species called the Verendi, known for their diplomatic skills and peaceful nature. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Peter had been reading Aliens long enough to see the tension in her movements. Ambassador Walsh, she said, her translator rendering her speech into perfect English. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation, Chancellor. Peter stood and offered a handshake, a human greeting he had explained in advance. Mira took his hand briefly, her skin cool and smooth. They sat across from each other, a small table between them. Through the windows, Peter could see the sprawling capital city of the Concordat, home to representatives from 40 different species. I will be direct, Mira said. The Concordat Council is concerned about recent events. You mean Gentle Haven? Yes. Your fleet destroyed 17 ships and killed thousands, all because of a distress call from a colony you had no connection to. Peter kept his tone even. We responded to a distress call from civilians under attack by pirates. We did what was necessary to protect innocent lives by destroying an entire fleet, a fleet of pirates who had just murdered 15,000 civilians and were preparing to enslave 50,000 more. Yes, Mira was silent for a moment, her large eyes studying him. Ambassador, you must understand. The galaxy has certain rules, certain boundaries. Military intervention requires authorization, negotiation, proper channels. Those channels take time. The colonists didn't have time. But where does it end? Mira leaned forward. If humanity responds to every distress call, every conflict, you will be at war constantly. You will make enemies. The galaxy will see you as aggressors. Peter had expected this argument. Chancellor, may I ask you a question? Of course. If your homeworld sent out a distress call, if your people were being attacked by pirates, would you want the responding fleet to wait for proper authorization? Or would you want them to come immediately? Mira's expression flickered. That's different, is it? Every species in the Concordat is someone's people. Every colony has families, children, dreams. The Pasari are no less deserving of protection than the Verendi. We have systems for this. The Union military, peacekeeping forces, proper procedures. Systems that would have arrived at Gentle Haven 3 weeks too late. We did the math, Chancellor. By the time a Union fleet reached them, every single colonist would have been dead or in chains. Mira stood and walked to the window, her back to Peter. You frighten us, Ambassador. Your species frightens the entire galaxy. We watched the battle recordings. The way your ships move, the power of your weapons, the brutality of your tactics. You destroyed the Ravagers like they were nothing. They were threatening civilians. They murdered 15,000 people as a warning. What did you expect us to do? Show restraint, mercy. We showed mercy to the civilians who called for help. The pirates made their choice when they pulled the trigger on innocent people. Mira turned back to face him. There are governments in the galaxy who see humanity as a threat now. Species with large military forces. Species who have always operated with certain freedoms. They see what you did to the Ravagers and wonder if they might be next. Are they planning to attack civilian colonies and murder thousands? No, but then they have nothing to fear from us. We're not interested in conquest or domination. We're interested in making sure that what happened to Gentle Haven doesn't happen to anyone else. Across the galaxy, news correspondent Teln reviewed the footage one more time before beginning his broadcast. He was a Praxian, a species known for journalistic integrity, and this story was the biggest of his career. This is Teln reporting for Galactic News Network. 3 weeks ago, the galaxy learned that humans are not a myth. They are real, they are powerful, and they have announced themselves in the most dramatic way possible. The screen behind him showed footage from Gentle Haven. Human ships tearing through the Ravager fleet, explosions and chaos, then peaceful scenes of human medical teams helping injured Passeri colonists. The question everyone is asking is simple. What do the humans want? Are they saviors or conquerors? Protectors or predators? Teln pulled up an interview recording. Lyra's face appeared on the screen, her expression grateful and awed. They saved us, Lyra said in the recording. We were going to die, all of us. And they came from across the galaxy to help people they had never met. I don't know what that makes them, but I know what it makes them to us. They're heroes. The screen shifted to show other interviews. A Concordat military analyst explaining how the human fleet had demonstrated tactical superiority, far beyond what anyone expected. A trade consortium representative worrying about the economic implications. A Union diplomat carefully avoiding questions about why Union forces hadn't responded. But perhaps the most interesting response comes from the criminal underworld. Teln continued. In the 3 weeks since Gentle Haven, pirate attacks have decreased by 40% across the entire sector. Slave markets report significant drops in activity. It seems the criminals are afraid. The screen showed footage of a known pirate haven usually busy with ships coming and going. Now it was nearly empty. The Ravagers were one of the largest and most feared pirate groups in this region. They had numbers, experience, and a reputation for brutality. The human fleet destroyed them in less than an hour. That message has been received by every pirate, slaver, and criminal organization in the galaxy. There is a new predator in space, and it hunts those who prey on the weak. Teln paused, choosing his next words carefully. This reporter has covered galactic affairs for 20 years. I have seen wars, treaties, and countless political maneuvers. But I have never seen anything like this. Humanity has changed the equation. The old rules, the old assumptions, they no longer apply. In a dimly lit chamber far from any civilized world, 5 figures met in holographic projection. They represented some of the most powerful criminal and military organizations in the galaxy. Each had their own reasons to fear what humanity represented. They cannot be allowed to continue, said one, a reptilian being with scars across his face. If humans become the galaxy's police force, our operations become impossible. Agreed, said another, a sleek predator species. But how do we stop them? They destroyed the Ravagers easily. The Ravagers were sloppy and overconfident, said a third. We need a coordinated response. Multiple attacks across different sectors. Force them to spread their fleet thin. And if that doesn't work? Silence fell across the gathering. Finally, the first speaker answered. Then we will need to make them understand that there are costs to playing hero. We find their weaknesses, their colonies, their trade routes, their civilians. We make them bleed until they decide that protecting strangers isn't worth the price. That could start a war. We're already at war. We just haven't formally declared it yet. Humanity has made their position clear. They're going to protect the weak. That makes them our enemy. The meeting continued, plans being made, resources being allocated. Across the galaxy, other similar meetings were happening. Some criminal, some political, some military, all of them trying to figure out how to respond to the new reality. Humanity was here. Humanity was strong, and humanity was apparently intent on changing the way the galaxy worked. Back on Earth, Peter's report reached the Council. He had met with 12 different governments, 20 news organizations, and countless private groups. The message was consistent. The galaxy was divided between those who welcomed human protection and those who feared or resented it. They want us to stop, Peter told the Council via video link. The ones who have always operated in the gray areas. The ones who profit from chaos and fear. They want us to go back to being quiet and distant. And the peaceful species? Asked President Sarah Kim. They want us to do it again. They want guarantees that we'll respond to distress calls. They want protection. We can't protect the entire galaxy. Maybe not, Peter agreed. But we can try. And more importantly, we can make it clear what happens to those who prey on the innocent. The Council debated long into the night. Some argued for caution, for restraint, for diplomacy. Others argued for action, for commitment, for standing by the principles that had sent Admiral Hunt to Gentle Haven in the first place. In the end, President Kim made the decision. We're not going to apologize for saving lives. We're not going to pretend that protecting civilians is somehow wrong. If that makes us frightening to some, so be it. Better to be feared by predators than to let prey suffer. She drafted a message to be broadcast across all galactic channels. It was simple and direct. This is President Sarah Kim of Earth. 3 weeks ago, our fleet responded to a distress call from Gentle Haven. We would do it again. To all peaceful species, know that humanity stands ready to help those in need. To those who would prey on the innocent, know that we are watching. The age of easy victims is over. Choose your actions carefully. The message spread across the galaxy in hours. Reactions were immediate and varied. Some species announced interest in forming alliances with humanity. Others withdrew into isolation, fearful of attracting attention. And in the darker corners of space, those who lived by violence and exploitation began to plan. If humanity wanted to be the galaxy's protector, they would learn that protection came with a price. They would learn that heroes could bleed. The war for the soul of the galaxy had begun, though few realized it yet. On one side stood humanity, and those who believed in protecting the weak. On the other stood everyone who benefited from chaos and fear. It was a war humanity hadn't sought, but it was a war they were prepared to fight. 6 months after Gentle Haven, Admiral Grace Hunt reviewed intelligence reports in her office and felt a familiar tension building. The situation had evolved exactly as she had predicted, though not in ways the politicians back on Earth had wanted to hear. Another attack, Captain Owen said, entering without knocking. They had worked together long enough that formality had become optional. Human outpost at New Meridian. They hit it hard. Grace pulled up the report. New Meridian was a research station, barely defended, studying exotic particles near a stellar nursery. The attackers had destroyed 3 habitats and killed 47 people before jumping away. They had left a message burned into the station's hull in multiple languages. This is the price of heroism. Who was it? Grace asked, though she suspected she knew. Coalition of 6 different groups. Pirates, mercenaries, and at least 2 species with legitimate governments backing them. They coordinated the attack, hit fast, and disappeared before our patrol ships could respond. Grace felt anger coil in her chest. After Gentle Haven, she had warned the Council that there would be retaliation. The galaxy's predators wouldn't simply accept humanity's new role without pushing back. But politicians always thought they could negotiate, could find diplomatic solutions. Sometimes the only solution was overwhelming force. How many attacks is this now? She asked. 17 in the past 2 months. All targeting human installations or ships. They're trying to make us bleed, make us reconsider our position. Is it working? Owen smiled grimly. What do you think? Grace stood and walked to the window overlooking the shipyard. Outside, new vessels were under construction. Not just military ships, but fast response vessels designed specifically for emergency intervention. The Council had authorized a massive fleet expansion after the 4th attack. Get me a list of every peaceful species that has requested protection or alliance since Gentle Haven, she said. I want to know who's with us. Owen pulled up the data on his tablet. 43 species have formally requested mutual defense treaties. Another 112 have opened diplomatic channels. And there's a group of 17 species that want to form something new. They're calling it the Free Worlds Compact. Free Worlds Compact? Peaceful species banding together under human military protection. They provide resources, intelligence, safe harbors. We provide defense and rapid response capabilities. Grace considered this. It was exactly what they needed. A formal structure for protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But it would also make them a target. The predator species would see it as a threat to their way of life. Set up a meeting with their representatives, she decided. If they want protection, they'll have it. But they need to understand what that means. This isn't going to be easy or peaceful. 3 days later, Grace stood before a gathering of alien diplomats on the space station Unity. The station was new, built specifically as a neutral meeting ground for the forming alliance. Representatives from 17 different species filled the chamber, all of them peaceful herbivores or pacifist cultures. "Thank you all for coming," Grace began. "I know many of you are afraid. The attacks on human targets have shown that there are forces in the galaxy who don't want change. But I want to be clear about something. We're not backing down." A murmur ran through the crowd. Chancellor Mira of the Concordat stood. "Admiral, with respect, every attack on humanity is our fault. You're being targeted because you helped us, because you help all of us. Perhaps if we stepped back, if we handled our own defense." "You can't," Grace said bluntly. "Not because you're weak, but because you've built your entire civilization around peace. You have no weapons development, no military tradition, no cultural framework for organized violence. That's not a flaw. That's a strength. But it also means you're vulnerable. So we hide behind you. You don't hide. You build. You trade. You create art and science and culture. You do all the things that make civilization worth protecting. And yes, we handle the violence. That's the arrangement." Another representative spoke up, a gentle being from a water world. "But the cost, Admiral. 47 of your people died at New Meridian. How many more will die protecting us?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "However many it takes. That's not bravado or political speech. That's simple math. If we don't protect you, the predator species will prey on you. They'll enslave you, kill you, destroy everything you've built. We've seen it happen. We won't let it happen again. Why?" The question came from Lyra, who was attending as Gentlehaven's representative. "I mean, I'm grateful, we all are. But why do humans care so much? What do you get from this?" Grace looked at the young Passari and saw genuine confusion. Most species in the galaxy operated on self-interest. Protection was transactional, based on trade or political advantage. "When I was young," Grace said, "my father told me a story. On Earth, thousands of years ago, there were no police, no organized law. Communities had to protect themselves. And there was a saying, 'The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing.' We decided long ago that we wouldn't do nothing." She gestured to the gathered representatives. "You asked what we get from this. We get to live in a galaxy where peaceful species can thrive. We get to know that children like Lyra can grow up without fear of pirates or slavers. We get to be part of something bigger than ourselves." "That's enough." The chamber was silent. Then slowly the representatives began to stand. One by one they signaled their commitment. The Free Worlds Compact was born. Meanwhile, in deep space, Captain Owen led a task force toward a known pirate base. Intelligence suggested this was one of the coordination points for attacks on human targets. It was hidden in an asteroid field surrounded by defense stations and patrol ships. "All ships weapons free," Owen ordered. "Remember, these are the ones who killed our people at New Meridian. No warnings, no mercy." The human fleet dropped out of slipstream at the edge of the asteroid field. Alarms immediately sounded across the pirate base. Ships scrambled to launch. Defense platforms powered up their weapons. It didn't matter. The human ships had learned from Gentlehaven. They were faster now, better coordinated, more brutal in their efficiency. The engagement lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, the pirate base was debris and 60 ships were destroyed. Owen broadcast a message on all frequencies. This base coordinated attacks against civilians. Everyone involved is dead. Anyone else planning similar attacks should think very carefully about whether it's worth dying for. The message was received across the galaxy. Other pirate bases went silent, their operations shutting down or moving to deep cover. The predators were learning to fear the hunters, but not all of them. A coalition of aggressive species, ones who had built their empires on conquest and slavery, watched humanity's actions with growing anger. They saw the Free Worlds Compact as a threat to their power, humanity as an obstacle to their expansion. They began to plan something bigger. Not raids or attacks on isolated outposts, a real assault, one designed to prove that humanity could be beaten, that the Deathworlders were not invincible. President Sarah Kim received the intelligence report about the planned attack and called an emergency council session. They're gathering a fleet. Estimates suggest over 300 ships from 5 different military powers. They plan to strike at Earth itself. The council chamber erupted in alarmed discussion. An attack on Earth was unprecedented, a direct challenge to humanity's homeworld. When, asked one counselor, 6 weeks, maybe 8, they're still coordinating, bringing ships from different sectors. We need to prepare defenses, call back our fleets. No, said Admiral Hunt, who had been listening via video link. That's what they want. They want us defensive, reactive, scared. We go on the attack instead. Attack where? President Kim asked. Their staging areas, their supply lines, their command structures. We hit them before they're ready, before they can coordinate. We show them that threatening Earth has consequences. The plan was risky. It meant dividing the fleet, striking at multiple targets simultaneously, engaging forces that outnumbered them. But it was also the most human solution possible. Don't wait for the enemy to strike. Hit them first, hit them hard, hit them everywhere at once. 2 weeks later, human fleets struck at 17 different targets across 4 sectors: military shipyards, supply depots, command centers. The attacks were coordinated down to the second, designed for maximum disruption. The aggressive species were caught completely off guard. They had expected humans to defend, to huddle around their homeworld and wait. Instead, they watched their infrastructure burn. Grace led the assault on the primary military shipyard of the Krell Dominion, one of the main aggressors. Her fleet dropped out of slipstream directly on top of the orbital facility and opened fire immediately. The Krell had ships in dock, half-built vessels that would never be completed. Target the construction gantries, Grace ordered. I want this entire facility destroyed. Railguns and missiles tore into the shipyard. Secondary explosions rippled through the structure as fuel reserves and weapons magazines detonated. Krell defensive ships tried to respond, but the human attack was too sudden, too overwhelming. In 30 minutes, the shipyard was gone. Years of construction, billions in resources, dozens of nearly complete warships, all reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Grace broadcast a message to the Krell military command. You plan to attack Earth. You plan to kill billions of humans because we dared to protect peaceful species. Here's our response. Every time you threaten us or our allies, we will destroy something you value. Every time you attack civilians, we will burn your worlds. This is your only warning. Similar messages went out from the other human fleets. The galaxy watched as humanity demonstrated that defensive wars were not their preference. They would rather take the fight to their enemies, rather strike first than wait to be struck. The coalition planning to attack Earth fell apart within days. Military leaders who had been eager for war suddenly became very interested in peace negotiations. Species that had backed the aggression quietly withdrew their support. President Kim addressed the galaxy again, her message broadcast on every channel. Humanity does not seek war. We seek peace. But we will not achieve peace by being victims. We will achieve it by making aggression too costly, by protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and by showing that predators are not the strongest force in this galaxy. She paused, her expression serious. The Free Worlds Compact stands. Any peaceful species who wishes to join is welcome. Any aggressor who threatens the Compact will face the full might of Earth's military. Choose your path carefully. The galaxy is changing, and you can either change with it or be left behind. On Gentle Haven, Lyra watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. Around her, the colony had been rebuilt better than before. Human engineers had helped, teaching the Pasari new construction techniques and defense systems. The colony was no longer helpless, but more than that, they were no longer alone. Humanity had proven that heroes were real, that someone would answer when you called for help, that the strong could protect the weak without demanding submission in return. Grace returned to Earth a month later for a memorial ceremony. In the capital, a new monument had been erected. On its surface were carved the names of every human who had died protecting others since the Gentle Haven mission. 47 names from New Meridian, 8 from other attacks, 6 fighter pilots lost in the initial battle. Lyra had traveled to Earth for the ceremony, representing the Pasari people. She stood beside Grace as they looked at the memorial. "I'll never forget what you did for us," Lyra said quietly. "What all of you did." Grace put a hand on the young Pasari's shoulder. "We don't do this for glory or gratitude. We do it because it's right, because someone has to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Will it ever end? The fighting, the threats? Probably not. There will always be predators. There will always be threats. But there will also always be protectors. That's our promise. You call, we answer. Every time. Forever." Lyra looked up at the memorial, at the names of humans who had died for people they never met, for causes that weren't their own. She understood now. Humanity wasn't just strong. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. They were strong and good, powerful and protective, capable of terrible violence in the service of protecting the innocent. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of predators ruling through fear was ending. A new age was beginning, one where the prey had guardians, where distress calls would be answered, where the strong protected the weak not for profit or power, but simply because it was right. And at the center of it all was humanity, the Deathworlders who had chosen to be heroes.